Speaking of vision.
Speaking of vision, our next story addresses the man who, in my opinion, I think probably saw more clearly and earlier than anyone else the business case for the importance of profound knowledge within complex systems. And I'm talking, of course, about W. Edwards Deming. The Deming Institute carries on the work of the man, and their fall conference is coming up on the campus of Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana next month. One of the speakers of the conference will be Andrew McKeon, Director of Operations for Markit Environmental Registry. His topic is, I think, is a fascinating one. Disruptive sustainability. Really interesting. So, what does the Deming system of profound knowledge have to say about sustainability? Well, quite a lot, actually. And to find out more, we're going to be joined right now via Skype by Andrew McKeon. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yes, you wrote about sustainability.
I'm enjoying your talk before about Hollywood and this idea that a system can't transform itself, it has to be transformed from the outside. That's sort of one of the takeaways I got from what you were saying.
I think that's true, and again, it's all about vision, you know. I think that you need to be able to step away and look at it, and you're right. I mean, big systems are really hard to do that, and actually you wrote about it, I think, really well in your piece, that you know, you need to be able to have a profound knowledge of a system in order to communicate it and spread that strategically throughout an organization. And the topic that you chose, the framework you chose to talk about this was really interesting. You chose to look at it from a perspective of climate change, which I thought was fascinating. Why did you choose climate change? Why was climate change the entry point into that for you?
Well, it actually happened that a few years ago I got involved with something called the Climate Project, which was a not-for-profit organization that trained American citizens to learn about what climate change was really all about from the science, and then use that as an opportunity to share within the community these stories. And the more I learned about climate change and the science of it, the more you know, my learnings from Dr. Deming started coming up. And you know, so how profound knowledge applies to climate change, I think, is really very clear and actually quite interesting, because the four components are appreciation for a system, knowledge of variation, theory of knowledge, and human psychology. And if you look at each of those four components, there's a lot that can be elucidated about the problem of climate change by looking at it from those four perspectives. For example, appreciation for a system. I actually gave a talk at the United Nations about 5 years ago on this, and before I gave that talk, I started really thinking about this deeply. And what I came to the conclusion was that since the Industrial Revolution, we've really seen the Earth as a tool and a subsystem of the global economy, this powerful system now that we have, the global economy, and that in a way, from sustainability standpoint, that's inside out. That the global economy is probably the most powerful subsystem of the Earth and the biosphere, but indeed it is a subsystem because it is completely dependent on that system, whereas the biosphere is not dependent on the global economy. So in terms of appreciation for a system, how do we then manage a global economy as a subsystem of the planet? And what does that mean in terms of alignment? And you know, clearly examples of new ways of getting energy that don't put 40 million year old carbon that's been sequestered in the ground and putting it up in the atmosphere. It's one example of how we use that systems thinking. Knowledge of variation, this is sort of really when it hit me, because if you understand what's happened to the climate over the last 2 million years, there's been much variation in the Earth's climate. There's been 7 great warmings and 7 great global ice ages. But the system was in what Deming would call, it was a stable system. There was an upper and lower control limit to both CO2 and temperature. And the causes of that variation were common causes. The causes had to do with the solar system, the tilt of the planet, the elliptical nature of the orbit around the Earth. So that system was creating that variation. Now we see where CO2 is going. It's way outside of the upper limit, and it's heading, instead of being between 180 and 280 parts per million, it's now at almost 400 parts per million. And basically, with a planet that's going to support 10 billion people by mid-century, if we do it with fossil fuels, it's going to be 1,200 parts per million of CO2. So we are now well outside of where we were over the last 2 million years of variation, and that has a lot of implications for the way the planet's going to look. So knowledge of variation I actually didn't come to, it wasn't Deming to climate change, it was climate change to Deming for me. And seeing that graph and understanding about variation really brought it home that his knowledge and his ways of framing things were very important for this. Theory of knowledge. When people say to me, oh, climate change is just a theory, absolutely correct. Climate change is just a theory. All knowledge comes from theory. Gravity is a theory, evolution is a theory, relativity is a theory. But those theories help create new knowledge that transformed, human society and the planet. And I think climate change, once it is accepted as a theory of great robustness that it is, I think we're going to see transformation there. But it is a theory, no doubt.
Well, Andrew,
and then finally, human psychology is the last component, and that's about, for me, the human psychology component of this is the inability for human beings to appreciate invisible, slow-moving problems. And this is an invisible, slow-moving problem, very hard to get people to really take it seriously. And also we have a preference for doing things the way we've done them, and there's also vested interest in doing things the way we've done them. So those four areas of profound knowledge, I think, were, for me, very helpful in understanding climate change, and it's
Well, let me ask you about sustainability for a minute. Just jump back on that. It's a buzzword today, but it's clear that leaders like Deming understood the importance of it, even if they didn't use that exact term back decades ago. So, what would Deming think about the focus on sustainability today? Would he consider it sloganeering, or is there something deeper to that?
Well, I think there is a danger that it's being used as sloganeering in many companies. I think sustainability is still seen as sort of the noble thing to do and sort of the right thing to do, rather than, the opportunistic thing to do, or even eventually the must do, because otherwise we'll be disrupted. But to your point about sloganeering, I think that the term has lost a lot of meaning for people, and it becomes a turn-off, and that's a problem. For me, it gets down to what does sustainability really mean from an authentic point of view, and ultimately it comes back to this idea of systems.
And Andrew, let's talk about psychology for a minute. I think that many times the human element in any systems change is both the greatest opportunity and the greatest bottleneck, really, for change. So how do you gain buy-in for profound knowledge when it can be somewhat abstract sometimes?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is, let's look at some companies that are actually, in fierce global competition with their competitors, who, to me, are emulating this. And how are their people, how are their employees getting involved in this, and how does it affect them? And a number of companies, I mentioned a few of them in the article, but let me just reiterate: Interface Carpets, Novellus Aluminum, SC Johnson, Patagonia, Method, Zappos. These are companies, maybe some of them are not the sustainability sort of rock stars, but some of them are. Patagonia clearly is. Interface, to me, is an example of the transformation of a company that was totally devastating to the environment, but its leader said, you know what? We can't keep making carpet and destroying the planet. We've got to figure out a way. So their goal is by 2020, all their carpets will be restorative to the environment rather than destructive to it. And that leader, unfortunately, just passed away. The leader, Ray Anderson of Interface, passed away last year. But the people that worked for him, everyone in the company, was totally committed to this aim and vision because they saw it as authentic, important, and allowed them to be a part of something that was bigger than themselves. And to me, I met Ray Anderson and I asked him about Deming and whether Deming had influenced him. But the truth is, whether he was influenced by Deming or not, he was embodying these principles. And I think that's what I want most out of this conference at Purdue, is not so much that everyone knows a lot about Deming, but that there are examples of the embodiment of these ideas, whether they do or not.
And Andrew, in addition to what we just discussed here, what else will you be touching on at that event?
Well, actually, I really want to talk more about this idea of sustainability as a disruptive force. And if you're familiar with Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, which became the Bible of Silicon Valley about 15 years ago, he talked about a lot of the same things that Deming was talking about, which is that you can't just manage by the numbers. He shows successful companies that ended up going bankrupt because they did business as usual and they did what they should do as good managers. Deming used to say, we're destroyed by good management. We're destroyed by doing the right thing because we're not looking at disruption. And I think sustainability can be this disruptive opportunity for companies.
Well, Andrew, thanks. I think that's great. We're looking forward to hearing more about the conference. That's going to be, again, October 18th at Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana. You can check out more and register for the conference if you want. Andrew's story is right below the player page down there. So, Andrew, we hope a lot of our viewers will come out and check that out. Thank you for joining us today and giving us a perspective on Deming and sustainability, and have a good time at the conference next month.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrew.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.